I think the good life for me is to actually be directly in touch with my own heart and my own compassion. And from that place, as it sort of fills me with the sense of feeling love and held, it is a flow of care that comes through me to others. Like it just absolutely happens. And then all the obstacles that get in the way of that sort of pure love also get, if we're actually at the work of really touching into this place, that those places get kind of cleared out so that we can actually just start to see each other.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Kelly Moore, PhD. Kelly has dedicated over 35 years to adolescent and family mental health, serving as the Director of Counseling and Learning Support at an independent school in the Seattle area. She spearheaded the creation of social and emotional learning curricula for grades 5 through 12, established a robust parent education program, and developed a well-being curriculum for faculty and staff. Driven by a steadfast mission to combat the alarming rise of depression, anxiety, and suicide among youth she witnessed throughout her career, she founded a company for caregivers. A company for caregivers is a science-based social-emotional curriculum for parents and guardians, and now for everyone, essentially. Hi, Kelly. Welcome.
Hi, Broderick. Thank you.
Looking forward to this conversation, a very interesting work that you're doing in the world. And I love having conversations with folks who've worked in education and who've done work associated with mental health. I just feel like 35 years of that type of experience is a wealth of knowledge that I think we all can learn from.
Thanks, Broderick. It is hard to hear the word 35. The number 35 seems like a big one for me, but thank you.
Yeah, I know. As I get up there in the age, I'm like, oh, wow, it's just passing by. I like to, in the beginning, I know I just read your bio, but I like for folks to share a little bit about themselves. Describe yourself, how you like to present yourself to the world in your own words.
Yeah. Yeah, because what I do in the world professionally is one thing, and then who I am is another. And I feel the older I get, the more those things are becoming unified. So one of the things I think that is important about me and my development is that I have had a long contemplative meditation practice that's really informed who I am and how I show up in the world. And for a long time, kept that pretty separate from the rest of my life. And it's been only over the past decade or so that I've been able to integrate this part of me that feels like such a rich and nourishing space into the actual professional world that I have been involved in. So that feels important to say. It also feels important to say that I am a parent. And so that everything I've learned and tested on the road. And I always make a joke that I was a parenting expert back in the 90s when I was single and teaching parent classes and multifamily groups and then going out and partying with my friends afterwards. That's when I was a parenting expert. And then I had to give it up around 1997 when I became a parent and had to really kind of go deep into the work myself to find the places where I could show up the way I wanted to.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you describe yourself, as you talk about yourself, you're talking about those things that are really important to you. Being a parent, and nurturing and caring for a child, I think is a very special thing. Even though I don't have kids, from the outside looking in, it just seems like such a wonderful experience, though I know challenging. Seems like a wonderful experience. And also the bringing in contemplative practice and how important that is to you. I hope we, as this conversation unfolds, that we come back to some of those things that you just mentioned here.
That's great. And I
Um,
want, can I say one thing about you kind of doing the disclaimer of not being a parent?
mhm,
Because people say that all the time. Look, I'm not a parent, you are. And I think one of the things I want to suggest is that we actually are all, in some ways, parenting, and
mhm.
because we're holding each other, and that this idea of that kids just have one parent or two parents is a relatively new concept. And so this idea, this idea that there's many of us holding each other in this space. And, I know some of my biggest wisdom comes from my aunts and uncles and friends and people that cared for my parents,
Mhm.
really supported me. So I kind of want to sort of say that we're all actually parenting this next generation, whether we're directly doing it or not.
Yeah, thank you for saying that because I'm since that I'm not directly a parent biologically. I am careful in saying that, but I'm glad you said it because I do think that if any of us who work with children, any of us who are around children, we inevitably have some kind of parental responsibility in how we show up around them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that you said that, and
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
So I like to start in the very beginning, and then throughout the rest of the conversation, we'll just unpack it.
Great.
Um, what is your view of what it means to live well, the good life?
Yeah. That was honestly your first question is the hardest for me. In terms of just coming up with a pat answer for it, but I really have been thinking about it since you let me know that was going to be a question. I think the good life for me is to actually be directly in touch with my own heart and my own compassion, and from that place, as it sort of fills me with the sense of feeling love and held, it is a flow of care that comes through me to others. Like it just absolutely happens. And then all the obstacles that get in the way of that sort of pure love also get, if we're actually at the work of really touching into this place, that those places get kind of cleared out so that we can actually just start to see each other from what my friend Ed used to call wise eyes, like this ability to be able to see not just what you're saying and doing in the world, but like who you are underneath. And to be able to hold that as in dignity and belonging and self respect. So, that to me is the good life. If we are all doing that to one another, if I'm showing up that way for myself, if I treat myself with dignity and respect, I want to treat you with dignity and respect. And the person I don't even know that's suffering with dignity and respect. So
Mm.
that to me is the good life, that we all see each other through those eyes, through wise eyes, through loving eyes.
Hmm. Yeah, I resonate with that. Coming from the heart. I love how you um, just didn't refer to it as all about yourself, and
Yeah.
how you are saying that the good life for you is coming from the heart and having care for others in the process. I think that's I resonate with that. I think that is
Yeah.
important. And it's nice to hear when other folks say that it's not just about me and my skin; it's
No.
about others as well.
Yeah. I think taking either end of those extremes can be a problem. So
Yes.
I have dear friends who are so out in the world doing the good work and exclude themselves,
Hmm.
right? And then I have other friends that are deeply involved in their own well-being and feel too overwhelmed with that to even think about the world at large. And
Hmm.
so my friend Vita and I talk about this as a Mobius strip, really, right? Like that they're really there's a me here that needs to be tended to, but it's in service, really, of how we show up in the world.
Exactly. It's we may be intending to do good with the work that we're doing, but if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not tending to our own nourishment, um, even though we're intending to do good in the world, sometimes we compromise how good we compromise the amount of good that we can do in the world
Yeah.
because we're not taking care of ourselves because we only have so much energy. If we're not fueling ourselves and giving ourselves what we need, then it's going to be very difficult to give what we really want or how much we really want to give.
Absolutely. And so there's that energetically. And then there's also this sense of, if I can't sit in my own pain
Mm-hmm.
and trust that my own presence and being, just alone, just being with myself, will help unwind it and will help
Mm-hmm.
it feel tended to, accompanied, which is where the word accompanied comes from, then how am I going to be able to sit with you in your pain without trying to fix you or make you different or make you better? Right? I can't
Mm-hmm.
sit with you in that space because I don't trust the space. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where I feel like our first testing ground is ourselves, to see, like, can I sit with this? And then it's natural that I want to sit with your pain
Absolutely.
because I trust you deeply to hold it. Yeah.
Exactly. Beautiful, beautiful. So, we're going to unpack this. Where did this come from?
Where did
this
this come
this
from?
this view, these views that you have about living well and
Yeah.
this tenderness.
Came from many years of not doing it that way,
Hmm.
many years of fixing myself, fixing other people, being 100% sure I knew what it was all supposed to look like. I think I shared with you, I knew how families were supposed to be. I knew what a dysfunctional family was. I knew what a functional family was, based on all my learning in school and all of my, 2 years of experience or whatever I had when I was teaching people. And I had to unlearn all of that when I became a parent, first of all, because I had this idea of what it meant to be an ideal parent or an ideal way of showing up. And my deep attachment to my child and to wanting to show up as a good parent actually got in the way of being the kind of parent I wanted to be. I had
Hmm.
all these places inside that hurt or were reactive. And I had to find a way to be with those places so that I could then be with my child. And so I would say that part of that is sort of my, I guess, my academic training. Got a little bit of academic training that helped me to be a good therapist, I think, where I could show up and just allow a different self to show up. I was able to show up for my clients in a way where it really was a space of non-judgment. It was almost like I went into this room of non-judgment and I could just sit in it, like in my head. But I didn't know how to do that for myself.
Hmm.
And so I also learned some deep contemplative practices, both just plain old mindfulness 101 is helpful with this, right? Just being in space. But I think things really revved up when I learned more Tibetan based practices of sort of receiving care. I learned from a teacher named John McCransky, who is also informed by many other teachers. And I have a teacher named Sakni Rinpoche that also have informed this sort of flow of care, that there's a way in which we are held in care, and then that comes through us.
Hmm.
And that really changed my life when I learned that. That really, really changed how I taught, how I showed up, and where I put my emphasis.
Hmm. Very interesting. I want to go back a little further.
Okay.
And we're going to come back to this. It's interesting that your becoming a parent was such a major shift for you.
Mm-hmm.
But even prior to that, the fact that you decided to go into counseling
Yeah.
and wanting to care for families, where did that interest come from? What sparked that?
Yeah, I think part of it is, again, my own pain, honestly. I
Hmm.
think that, we always have this joke in the PhD world, is that you do me search, not research, right? Like you're drawn to what you want to study because of your own pain. And
Hmm.
I grew up in a family, a really large family, extended family in Chicago. And I lived next door to my grandparents, and my other set of grandparents were about 40 minutes down the road. And my parents, were married, and I went to the same elementary school that my grandfather went to in this kind of
Wow.
suburb of Chicago. And there was this sense of just deep belonging, being held, just knowing I was okay. And then my parents got divorced when I was about 9,
Hmm.
and we moved to California. And it was sort of the end of Eden in some ways. Like there was a sense of I didn't have that surrounding support and care. And my parents were really loving people that didn't know how to hold our pain around this because they were in so much pain themselves around this. And I could see a before and after, if that makes sense. I could see what it was like to be held by this extended world, and then what it was like to feel alone with it. And I think in some ways I was lucky because I had that before, right? I think there are people that never had that taste of what it's like. So I had the taste. I knew something else was possible. And I just didn't know exactly how to find that for myself. And I think as all good kids do, and I was a good kid, instead of sort of getting angry or turning outward, I turned inward. So I turned against myself to say, well, the system can't quite hold my big feelings, so there must be something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And so I think turning toward kind of the field of counseling and psychology and social work and all the things was really a way of trying to understand this better, and also a deep desire to support kids that were like me and others like me out there. I mean, not just like me. In other words, the suffering of children. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it really does take, I believe, just one or two caring adults to help a kid, like the teachers that I had that held me, the coaches, just the people in my life. I can tell you all of my mentors and how they supported me and helped me through times where I felt pretty alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important, to have adults in our lives that's there to support and hold us. And I think you said something important there, that's such an important piece of the puzzle, having a loving, caring environment for a child to be nurtured in.
Yeah.
And to have that separation happen, how old were you when that happened?
9.
9, yeah. Okay, yeah, definitely formative years there.
Yeah.
At 9 years old, to have that happen, that split happen, kind of a shock to the system.
Yeah.
And listeners, I hope you can hear that, like the importance of having that container and what can happen when that container is broken partially.
Yeah.
And can I ask you one more question? Was it one parent, was your mother or father that you ended up staying with when you came to California? Or?
It was my mother. Yeah,
Your mother.
my mother.
Okay.
And she had married a man who became my stepfather. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then.
Yeah.
Okay. And you didn't have any extended family here in California?
No, I did not. Yeah. Other than his family.
His family.
He's a big Irish man, had lots of family, but they were not my family per se that I was raised with. Yeah.
Got you. So yeah, that's a big shift and big change. I think, you were saying that you had a taste of what it felt like prior to the breakup and coming to California. You knew what it felt like, at least.
That's right.
And you had support. If it wasn't your family, you still had support from teachers, coaches, etc.
Yeah.
To hold
and
you
siblings and my
you.
siblings. We were pretty tight. Yeah.
Are they older than you, or?
I'm the oldest.
Okay.
But my brother is 10 and a half months younger than I am. So he's my Irish twin. So we had each other, and my sister, I had 2 younger sisters after that. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm asking these questions, just drawing out and the importance of support, the importance of having someone by your side, being a holding that safe space for you.
Yeah.
Because during that time of change, of challenge, and as you began to go inside, having, even though the way you were looking towards yourself at that time wasn't necessarily positive, but having those people in your environment, in your community, to support you throughout that, I would argue, or I would suspect that had a impact on you wanting to go out and create that for others.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I come from a family of people that help people. So my grandmother was a
mm,
social worker in Chicago, went to Hull House for coffee, like early days social worker, then became a teacher. My stepmom, social worker, same thing in Chicago. Like there's a long line of people in my family that help. And so that was also an ethic, very important to my family and my grandparents in particular. They were so proud when
mm,
they saw that that was the direction I was taking, and they helped with some of my college and things like that. And so they were so happy that the financial pieces that they were contributing to me were going toward helping the greater good. So I always felt very good about that decision in my life. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to. Is it okay if I talk a little bit about the care piece too? Is it all right if I drill into this a little bit? Or you want me to wait for
Oh,
some questions? Okay.
no, no,
Okay.
go for it. That's where I'm heading. I'm heading
Uh,
towards that direction. So yeah, go for
Perfect.
it.
Okay. So I think what I want to say about this is that I think I told you about 10 years ago, I stumbled across these practices, these
Mm-hmm.
sustainable compassion training classes. And it was you start with receiving care and you're imagining that people are there caring for you, that have loved you, or caring moments or religious figures. And I remember this being such a challenging practice because I cut myself off in some ways from some of that care because it also had pain in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there was pain from the people that changed it. And what I came to realize later as an adult, and this is why I wanted to teach this to parents, is that there is love around us all the time. Like we all have had glimpses of this. We've all
Mm-hmm.
had ways that people have held us in care, or we really couldn't be here. We
Mm-hmm.
couldn't be this person showing up as we are right now without having someone having loved us or cared for us. And that we can go back in some ways. And in my practice now is extracting in some ways that love that was always there, despite places where it also hurt.
Yeah.
And so that's the piece that feels more, that healed something in me in a way that nothing ever had, that no psychology technique could, right? This idea that no, I actually never stopped being held in love. Never. It's always been there and it will always
Mm-hmm.
be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And bringing that to mind, giving some attention to that.
You have to, because as I
Yeah,
tell, this is now going to be my little teacher brain, which I know you already know this, Broderick, but the brain learns threat 7 times faster than it learns safety.
exactly.
So we will really attend to the fearful places in ourselves way more quickly than the places of love and softness and open and safety. So it does
Mm,
take training.
exactly. Because it's easy for you. And I was asking you those questions earlier because it would be easy for you to focus your attention on your parents' divorce and you coming out here to California.
Right.
But I noticed how you brought up the care that you had with
Yeah.
your grandparents in Chicago, the care that you received from coaches and teachers when things
Yeah.
were hard, even though there was a inside of yourself, it was difficult for you to have that care for yourself. And when the time was ripe for you to learn these practices, to remind you, like, no, no, the care has always been there.
That's right.
You've
That's
had
right.
all these things around you, and now can you? Here's an opportunity to give attention to that and allow that to be a vehicle for healing
That's right.
in your experience.
That's right. It's a both and story.
Yeah.
It really is, because I took those ACEs scores, this trauma ACEs score.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a high score, right? I have a high score in ACEs. We went through some traumatic stuff as kids, and that could be my story. Like that
Yeah.
could be my identity, and I could decide to just be that the rest of my life. But I really see that is actually not my story. That's not true for me. It's a
Hmm.
both and. I went through really hard things and I've been held in love. And love is what has healed my heart and allowed me to show up as the parent I am today.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we overly emphasize traumatic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We overly focus on, oh, this bad thing happened to me, and we we hold that to our identity. We embrace that as an aspect of our identity. It has happened, but I don't have to identify as a traumatized person. I think it's important to visit that stuff, and but with that tenderness and caring that you're speaking of, and reminding ourselves like, okay, these traumatic things have happened to us in our lives, but there are also these other things that was there nurturing and supporting me, because you're right, for evolutionary reasons, folks, that we tend to emphasize on emphasize the negative. And we have to intentionally, we have to use our agency, and you put some energy behind it to give attention to those positive qualities and attributes and experiences that we've had, and use those positive experiences to support healing from those traumatic experiences,
Yeah.
and not allowing those experiences to define us. um, I think that's my
Yeah.
fear sometimes with the I think I'm happy that a lot of people are talking about trauma right now,
Mhm.
but sometimes we can get fixated on the trauma and lose sight of all of the other things, other possibilities that could be attended to support the healing from those
Yeah.
traumatic experiences.
Yeah. And I think that's another place where there's a both and. So I think for me to heal, I did need to acknowledge the
Yeah.
places of hurt, because I think that's what happens in systems. There's a lot of like, no, it's not that bad for you, or it's worse for me, or you know how that is. Like everyone's sort
Mm-hmm.
of like, there's a little land grab for empathy when you're in systems, right? And so I think that it does take some time to be able to touch the places of pain and say, no, this really happened, this is really hard, but not to furnish that place, right? Like that's the thing, is like, let's not make that your home, but let's acknowledge that this is here, and let's also see what else is here, right?
Yes.
Like what else is here, these things are true. um but they're not permanent. They're not there. You don't have, this is not your future. Your future is not written by what happened
Mm-mm.
to you in the past, unless you keep referencing the past.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're going to use the past, if these things arise in us, there are things in our subconscious mind that we have no control over, that bubbles up, and I can revisit my past for looking for those positive things that have happened in my past. I think there are a lot of things that has happened in my life that I'm not happy with, and I could focus on that, and I think that'll make me miserable.
Hmm.
Or I can acknowledge that those things have happened, but let me give some attention to those wonderful moments of my life. And how do I take those wonderful moments and experiences in my life and take from that and try to extract from those experiences something that can support me and uh, living in a way that is not living in a way that is, how am I'm trying to say this without I'm trying to find the right words here. Living in a way that is in line with those types of experiences, if you understand what I'm
Hmm.
saying.
Hmm. Hmm.
um because I'm thinking, because there's caveats to everything I'm saying, of course. I'm not trying to say forget the negative things that are happening in your life. I'm not saying go and try to live in the past. No, live in the present, but also reflect on that these uh, experiences that we've had that have informed us in a positive way.
Yeah. And have those two meet. I think that's the problem, is that these
Exactly.
places of pain get frozen in us as
Yeah.
though that's the only thing there. And that's, again, you mentioned it, for evolutionary purposes. We don't want to forget the places of deep pain, because our body wants to protect us from the future. And it's just a matter of bringing in what's actually present to when those places of pain pop up and having them meet. And if it's okay, I'll tell a little story about that.
All okay.
Okay. So I shared with you that I had breast cancer a couple years ago. And part of that pain for me was that my sister died of breast cancer. My younger sister died of breast cancer in 2015. Like, notice how I can't add real quickly. So I just say 2015. I can't say how many years ago that was. So there was a sense of when it came to me and not knowing exactly what the prognosis was going to be at first, that it was all I had was the past to reference. I had an aunt that also died of it in our home, and another aunt that died of it. So I have this sense of people getting this disease and dying of it. And so there was a sense of, this is now my turn. And because I could only pull from the past, right? I didn't have a picture of what my path was going to be. So I was in this pain and in trauma, right? Like, here it is. This is me now, and I can't escape my past. And I was so frozen in this place. And I said, okay, what would Dr. Kelly teach in one of her meditation classes? And I'm like, that we bring in care. And instantly my grandmother, who I call Nana, came to me. And Nana was just a source of unconditional, the one that was the social worker in Chicago and the teacher. And she came to me, and that love that she had for me all through my whole life touched this place of trauma inside of me that was frozen. My body was frozen. I couldn't sleep. I lost 20 pounds in 1 month. I couldn't eat. I was terrified. And she touched this place in me, and it exploded into blue irises. And blue irises were the flowers that she loved, that I would always get her. And it literally just happened inside of me. My whole body became unfrozen. And I was like, okay, I'm okay. I looked at my husband. I'm like, let's go. I'm all right today. It was like something broke. And so I bring that up because I think I couldn't push away the trauma. I couldn't say, no, that's not me. That was the past. The more I pushed that away, the stronger it became, because it actually was just wanting liberation through love too. Like, even our old traumas and our identities, they just want to be liberated.
Yes.
And the only way I know how to liberate them is through love.
Yeah.
It's the only way I know how. I mean, other people might have other ways, but for me, that's the way I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that story sums it up right there. And how your grandmother coming to you, and that tenderness, though that experience of tenderness in your life was available to meet that challenge in the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think, we're talking about the good life. We're talking about living well. And, I'm kind of glad this came up, how suffering, I mean, you've done Buddhist work, and, the role of suffering is at the one of the core things that we're trying to minimize. I don't know if we can overcome all suffering, but we're trying to minimize unnecessary suffering. But also how suffering, especially when we're young, or even as adults, we don't know what's going to happen. We're going to experience significant challenges in our lives. Like with breast cancer, you don't know.
Yeah.
You didn't know for sure. Yeah, you may have a family history of it, but you never know for sure.
No.
And these things come as shocks to our system. But the thing is, well, I'll ask you, and I think we've kind of already unpacked it, but just for the audience here, can you say something about how the role that suffering plays in living well in some capacity?
That's a really good question. I first want to just tell the listeners, so I don't bury the lead, I'm fine.
Yeah.
My breast cancer, it turned out, was just actually nothing like my sister's, and was very treatable and curable, and I'm doing great. So I just want to say that, because I tell this story and then people later are asking me, are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah. So I'm okay. Physically, I'm okay. I think suffering, for me, and I can talk for me, and I can talk for other people, I think suffering is a motivation to see truth. I think
Mm-hmm.
that my own suffering, knowing that this isn't all of life, if I believed that this is just all that I'll ever have, suffering, and that's just, my home and I've furnished it, then there isn't a lot of motivation to change. It just sort of is, yeah, this is all I deserve and this is all I have. So I think these tastes of non-suffering, which is what I think is so important for us all to get that taste,
Mm-hmm.
it's a motivation to say, oh, I want to see beyond this. I want to like as much as I would never wish upon anyone to get breast cancer, I have been able to see through so much fear because basically within 3 days, my prayer was, help me see true safety. Help me see true safety. What is true safety? Because it can't be my health. It can't be a diagnosis. It can't be a doctor, right? It's got to be something else. And that was just my constant meditation. And then it showed me all the places I had been trying to get safety from that weren't actually safe, right? And so that was like, that's suffering. When I am getting safety from keeping things exactly the way they are, that's going to be suffering because it's going to change. People we
Mm-hmm.
love die.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies get old. Like, this is life. So I think that is the role of suffering, and seeing that in some ways. I think some people suffer too much. I'm not going to be here and say, because of my experience of suffering and how it liberated me, that everybody should have suffering. I don't believe that. I think some people have way too much suffering. And we need to be very attuned to that and liberating some of that suffering that's unnecessary. That's, as John Powell calls it, surplus suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, in my life, suffering has been the path to liberation.
Yes, I'm glad you said all of that, because I was going to say, hold on now, folks. We're not saying that you should go out and try to suffer so you can grow. No, that's
No,
not.
or that systemic racism or things like that are like just good for you. I don't believe
No,
that. Or poverty or inequities. I don't believe any of that, actually.
no, no. We're not saying go out and seek suffering. Don't worry, it'll happen.
Yeah.
And
That's
that,
right. That's
and the
right.
idea is that, to, again, like you know from your Buddhist experience, and for me, study Buddhism and Buddhist practices and yoga as well, and how in those traditions, the idea is to overcome suffering. And I think what they mean is overcome unnecessary suffering. I
Yeah.
don't know if you're going to prevent all suffering. You
No.
can prevent some unnecessary suffering. And I think that that's an important part. But
Yeah.
also, when that suffering do comes, because it will in some capacity, it gives us the opportunity to reflect. Now, here's the thing that I think that appears that it happened to you, that at a phase of your life, you got access to technologies to help you
Yeah.
reflect. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of us are missing that. A lot of us are missing, I know I did in the past, I was missing the tools to help me deal with the suffering, to help me bring in those positive qualities and experiences, and hone that suffering in a way that I can allow it to pass, that I can learn from it so I can grow
Mhm.
from it. And that's the problem that we're seeing. And I think the work that you're doing, you're giving people tools to help them deal with their suffering, and to use that suffering as a vehicle for um, overcoming that suffering.
Right.
And so it's like the suffering is there, but the challenge that initiated this suffering, I would call it an experience that created discomfort. And then our minds, the I maker, the identity maker in our minds, the egoic process, creates narratives about that suffering that keeps us down, that perpetuates that
Yes.
suffering. But we
Yes.
can learn, get tools like mindfulness,
Mhm.
awareness,
Mhm.
and all these other different tools in these various contemplative practices to help us move through it and learn something, and grow and expand and enrich our lives
Yeah.
from those experiences.
Yeah. And I also, I want to say this too, is that there's this big suffering that, I'm talking about. Cancer is a big suffering, and death of a sister is a big suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's been breaking my heart lately is seeing everyday suffering, like the kind of, how do I want to say this? People that do have lives that are not filled with struggle, but yet they're not able to open to them, right? That there's a sense of not being able to receive the joy that is your life, that there's a sense of not enoughness inside, or comparative mind, or my kid's not good enough at this, or I have too much to do. That there's a way in which, and I'm not going to blame, I promised you, Broderick, I'm not going to blame society for everything, but there's a way in which we do have a very individualistic culture, a very driven, productivity obsessed culture that sort of makes us believe if we could just do more, that we'll be okay. And we're missing out on some beauty of life. And so that's the piece where I see that actually, like, I actually think dealing with real stuff in real life is actually easier. I remember my sister saying she was very worried about getting cancer, even at a young age, and then got it. And she said getting cancer was far more doable than the worry of it.
Yeah.
And so what I see people really struggling with is this sense of constantly being in worry of what could potentially happen, and missing out on this moment, this day, this, like, and then you look 2 weeks later and you're like, man, do I wish I would have just appreciated that day. That day when we were all sitting at the beach together and playing in the sand, there wasn't much going on, and I was wishing I were somewhere else. I would give anything to be back on that beach again with my babies, right? Something like that. Yeah.
Bingo. Exactly. I'm glad you are. Yeah, it's when we talk about this stuff, it's kind of hard to clarify, but we're clarifying what we mean here. And that there are degrees of suffering.
That's right.
So you can grow up with a loving family. I've known people at least until my late 20s or early 30s. Yeah, even in my early 30s, I've had friends who had never experienced death in their family. They just never knew. They had loving parents. They're wealthy. Not any major issues, but man, they were suffering. And that suffering, now those favorable conditions, having financial stability, having a loving parents, and all those different things are great. Not having any major health issues in your life, great. That's a good thing. I think we can work towards that if we can, and I encourage that if we can. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to suffer. We're not going to have challenges, because the way our minds work, we're going to be dissatisfied. And it is sometimes when we have a major shock, it forces us to look.
Yes.
It can, if we have the resources. That's the thing. It's a big if. If we have the resources, if we, through our educational system, through friends, through some capacity, our religious community, if it's a healthy religious community, if we have some resources, it can help us transform our lives in ways where those little things, I shouldn't say little things, those things that was causing us suffering in our mind, we can actually start to work through those things.
That's right.
Now, because we've been forced to stop and look closely and deeply and ask the big question: what is it all about? What's the meaning of all of this?
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
And having some tools are important. Speaking of those tools, I know you do work, and the work that you're doing is essentially educational. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's educational, it's experiential. So I think I have a curriculum and writing a book and all those things. And the most powerful moments are when we're all in space together and people feel that, like, they feel something open and they feel what life would be like with support.
Yeah. A version of education is not just cognitive, but
that's right.
Education that's rooted in experience.
That's right.
So can you say more about that? Can you say about the importance of what I'm saying, education, but the importance of these trainings and this work that you're doing? Yeah.
Well, and I like you use the word education because I think one of the things that I felt really bad about is that parents who kind of got to the end of their rope, who came to see me as a family therapist when I was doing that, they got the education. Like I could teach them some things, but it wasn't until they were in massive amounts of crisis that they were getting this education. And things just like we're talking about, just the basic thing of that the brain is designed for survival, not to thrive,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have to work hard to have a brain thrive. Most people don't know that, right? Most
Mm-hmm.
people aren't taught about how the brain works, how the mind works, how the heart works. And so yes, I believe that's every parent, every being's right to understand that we're up against this evolutionary system that isn't in our favor for well-being. And to be able to have a place where not only are we taught these things in a cognitive way, but like how we learn them through our somatic bodies, and really importantly in community. So one
Mm.
of the ways I don't teach individually. I think I will have this book that comes out and people will probably read it individually. But for the most part, I have never really offered individual classes because the magic that comes out of these groups is the sense of not being alone and going through this together. I held this retreat last weekend, and most of the women had not been on a retreat before of that nature. And just the sense of, I got through a quarter of my content, so because, here I am, my content is so important and what I'm going to teach is so important. And I dropped it because this magic was happening among people of just this sense of, I've longed for this. I've longed to express myself. I've longed to be in community. I've longed to open my heart this way and feel this kind of love. And so those are the kind of tools and resources that I think you're referring to, is that access to these loving communities that we have. You said it, churches, they have their own issues, right? Like I was part of a big church growing up as well that told me that my parents were going to hell because they got divorced. But so that wasn't so great. But what I missed by leaving the church was these communities that are formed of people that know you for a long time, that are all actually working toward the unseen, right? Faith
Yes.
and what's holding us. So there's something also, there's something that has been lost as we've become more of a secular society.
Mm-hmm.
Lots gained. A lot of people get liberated and get to be seen in ways that they didn't in traditional churches. But I do believe we need some form of that back in our lives, some form of spiritual communities, whether we call it spiritual or wellness community, it doesn't matter, but some place in which we're held by
Mm-hmm.
others.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with you. That's the thing I tell people. I miss the church. There are
Yeah.
aspects of it I don't miss, but the parts I do miss is what you're saying.
Yes.
Even if you're in a community with people who are, I'll just say, lots of drama,
Yes.
but they're seeking something. There is an intention towards the transcendent in some capacity,
That's right.
and that transcendent, for the most part, I'm not a theologian, but for the most part, that transcendent from that traditional perspective is about love and about the
That's
good,
right. That's right.
and being in community with people, singing with people, doing ritual with
Singing,
people.
right.
Those things are just, those are I think some of the most important parts about living well,
I agree with you
because
on
of
that.
what you're saying,
That's
because of
right.
what you just said
Yeah.
about you being in an environment. Now, I'm not saying a lot of these institutions are not like this, but like the space that you created, when people can be in an environment where they can really express themselves authentically.
Yes.
And I think that having a spiritual community, again, you don't have to call it spiritual, but um, I want us to use that word, not just you
Yeah.
and I, but I'm just saying in general as a public, like, hey, that's a spirituality is important. It's
Yes.
good. It's okay. We can separate spirituality from religious dogma,
That's right.
and being in spiritual community, being in community with people where you feel safe enough to express yourself,
That's right.
to be tender,
That's right.
to be held in a space of love, is an for me, one of the most important parts about living a good life is having that.
That's right.
Because like we're saying, we're going to suffer. We're going to have challenges,
That's
you
right.
know, even when there's nothing major going on in our life, our mind is going to find some way to trick us into, um, because of not just our mind, but there are social factors, the way our society is designed around productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that with the tendencies of our mind, it's going to cause some pain and suffering. And it's nice to have a community of people that you can be with, to hold you
That's
and to
right.
feel safe with, to
That's
be
right.
held with love and tenderness.
That's right.
I mean,
And that is what, I mean, if you look at the work of, this is going to be my little sciencey part, but if you look at the word of Jim Cohen from, I think he's still at UVA, and he talked about the social baseline theory, which is that our brains are really designed to imagine that we'd be in community.
mm-hmm.
So when we're not, or when we feel alone, it's terrifying to the brain, because we are designed to be cooperative, collaborative beings.
Yeah.
And so things like churches or communities, even I was thinking of even the lovely casseroles, right? The casseroles, the dinners that people bring to each other. They're
Yeah.
all sacraments of love in some way. They're a way of saying you're not alone. Like we can help feed you during this time when you're down. And I know, when I had the morning of my surgery, I didn't know this, but I had two groups that sort of gathered to hold circle for me while I was going into surgery. There was a group that I had been a part of, and then there was a group of people that I taught that they just kind of self-organized. And that's church, right? Like that
Yes.
is church. There were people, I'm going to cry saying this, there were people that took out time from their day to hold me and my doctors so that I could be well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wheeled into that room, and I did not feel alone.
Mm-hmm.
I did not. I had all of them up there with me. I just knew I was not alone.
Mm-hmm.
So we need that from a spiritual sense, but we also actually need the boots on the ground, the hands bringing the casserole,
Yeah.
the cards, the love, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly, this is thank you for sharing that. And no, that's a lot of the energy behind this podcast is that.
Yeah.
Is to say, those of you who listen, you've been attending to a conversation where we're talking and exploring ideas about the good, something positive, just giving our attention to that and opening ourselves up to the possibility of the good, and finding people who are open and willing to attend to the good for an hour, a
Yeah.
conversation about the good for an hour.
Yeah.
No, that's my tribe. That's my
Yeah.
church. I
Yeah.
would love to be in person and be with people that are open to this type of exploration, and digging into the messiness of it. The
Yeah.
challenges that come. But I think it's that's what it's about, because life is hard, and it's lovely to have a supporting community, people to come together and to take that time out of their lives to support you and be with you.
Yeah.
Man, that's a blessing, um, to have that. And how do we create that? How do we make that more probable? What are some things that we can do to make that more probable?
Mm-hmm.
Having community.
Yeah. I think one of the things is to stop seeing other all over, right?
Yeah.
To just this othering of people, this idea that people have to be just like us, think like us, look like us, pray like us, to deserve care and love. I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that gets in the way of seeing community everywhere. I think this idea of individualism, of like, we got to do it on our own, that sense is such an obstacle to this community, because it's sort of like, in that culture, it's a form of weakness. And I'm not saying that we go fight the culture, because I think fighting the culture just is fighting. I think what I try to teach parents is to see the water we're swimming in, just see it,
Mm-hmm.
and say that's normal, but normal's unwell. It's sort of like I've taught about the tyranny of normal for a long time, and then Gabor Mate had the book of the myth of normal. right? Where
Mm-hmm.
he talks about so much dis-ease comes from normalcy. So I think that's one of the things, is to say, like, how we've been trained to do it on our own, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and be individualists. We question that, right?
Yes.
I think the other thing is to start to see the interconnectedness of us all. And again, I don't want to get on a soapbox about capitalism, because it's not anti-capitalist, but one of the things that capitalism does is blinds us to care. So I tell the story of being on a retreat where I was so filled with love and just care. And I was staying at a place, it was like a bed and breakfast, and he brought me breakfast. And I was like, this is the most loving breakfast that's ever been made by me. You know how that feeling when you're sort of in ecstasy, it's like, this man made me breakfast, I could weep. And then I had the thought, oh, but I'm paying for this. As though because I paid for it means it didn't come from love.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so
Yeah.
that's what I mean by capitalism getting in the way. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we could go down the two, but I don't want to do that. What I want to say is that paying for services in some ways makes us actually feel alone. So in fact, there's been some research that says there's a real difference between a friend that will sit and listen to you than paying for a therapist. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
paying for a therapist is good. And if you need to do it, it's great, but it doesn't have that same sense of I'm living in community as a friend showing up. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think just knowing that, like knowing that we actually are all interconnected. We are all helping each other every day. We couldn't have this society without it. So to catch on to that, to start to notice that, this is going to sound so hokey and self-helpy, but literally every night, who helped you today? Like,
Mm-hmm.
who was there for you? How did you show up? Like, who was kind today?
Mm-hmm.
And being grateful for that. So seeing this web that we're in is the first thing. If you don't see it, there's no way you can build it, right? Like
Exactly.
then everyone's out trying to grab, and the grabbing keeps us from seeing that we have, right?
Exactly.
So I think seeing that we have, and then intentionally and building and wanting that for everyone. So I think that one of the things that I believe strongly in is that, yes, we have our love for our children. And that's why so many parents are so willing to talk about their cause of suffering. Like if their kid is suffering, they're willing to do anything for their kid. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a way in which they're so open to any teachings at that point. What I would also love is for us to have that same motivation for anyone's kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
To really like that they're all our children. And if one child is dying by suicide in our community, that is ours, not just because there's a contagion effect, but that is ours to have heartbreak over.
Yep.
That we have to do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that when there is something to be done. And that literally was what motivated me to start this program was about the fifth suicide in the community. I was part of a team that would go out to schools to help. And my heart was broken. It was
Yeah.
broken by this. And I was like, we've got to do something else. We've got to do something to actually open up the community, so that I believe so many parents are alone, right? And so that idea of opening up community, extending it, caring about kids that just aren't ours, caring about families that aren't just ours, caring about political parties that aren't just ours, caring about races that aren't just ours. We have to care beyond what our brains are tribally designed to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of it. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Really beautiful. We're coming to a close here, and this has been great. I mean, there's so many avenues I would love to explore with you. Yeah, this has been very thought-provoking and stimulating. Yeah, I like those things. And so listeners, you can go back and rewind and listen to all those again, because that was very beautifully said. Can you say, I'm going to ask two more questions here. Can you say, what does that, I know you've done quite a bit of contemplative practice, but I would love for the audience to hear, I would like to hear, and the audience to hear as well. What are those attributes of living well, and how you describe what living well is? And you say coming from the heart, you talked
Yeah.
about all these different things. I guess what I'm asking is, what does it feel like? What does living
Mm.
well feel like?
Mm.
Because I think you've been pointing to that. I just want to
Yeah.
see if you can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. It feels, to me, it feels joyful. It feels celebratory. It feels like joyful because I'm looking out my window right now and seeing snow on the trees and it's beautiful, like that kind of joy.
Mm-hmm.
And it also feels like clarity, right? Like there's a sense of, oh, I see through my judgment and I see who you are, right? Like, and I see your essence. It feels like wanting to be surprised by people, not knowing who they are, like actually not using the self-referential historical brain, but being afresh in this moment, like surprise me. My daughter, we went on a trip recently and my daughter set an intention for the trip. And one of her intentions was to be surprised by us as a family on this 3-week trip. And I loved that. That's a form of love, I want to be surprised by you because I don't know you fully. So how can I show up and actually have that much curiosity that you will surprise me? So it's curious, it's clear, it's communal, it's courageous, right? Because there's places in me that take a lot of courage to face. And I think for me over the time of my life, it's just a lot of unknowing. Like I think I thought I knew a lot and now I just don't know as much. And so I'll hear a news story and people are all weighing in and they know, and they're on one side and the other's on the other side. And I just have to sit in a deep, I don't know. I don't know about this. I see suffering on both sides and I don't know where I don't have a home to stand in here. Those kind of things, right? To be truthful in that way, to be really honest. So when I feel filled up with the kind of love and compassion and I'm not being dragged by the conditioned mind that does exist in me, please, listeners, know that, as I say all the time, I put the ass in compassion. Like I am not always good at all. I have so many places that come up and fight and are not that way. But when I am, that's what the world looks like to me. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. I absolutely love it. We talked about it, quite a few things here. And I would say a lot of it is self-help. I embrace self-help. It's so great. That's what Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, that's what they were all about. And then, I don't know, it got wacky in philosophy after a while.
Right. That's right.
But yeah, we've explored education, the process of learning. We explored that that we do have challenges, suffering in our lives, and what we can do, learn some things to help us heal that suffering, overcome it, minimize suffering in our lives. Talked a lot about love. This has just been great, and I'm going to go back and listen to this and see, can I grasp some of these things that you brought up. This has been just a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
Any final words that you would like to leave the audience with?
No, I guess what I want to say to you, Broderick, is like in our conversation, I think you can feel and I can feel that there was like just by just this little bit of dipping into it, we dipped into it, we caught on to it, right? This thing that we both know deeply, and that it doesn't take being enlightened or being some deep practitioner. It really is available. And when you speak to it, it makes itself known. Yeah. Yeah.
It's love, and it
It's
feels
love.
like love.
That's right. And it's not personal. We don't know each other well enough to be
No,
deeply in love with each other, but we're expressing love with each other right now.
exactly. We
Yeah.
can let go, surrender, let go of those boundaries, and
Yeah.
tap into that boundless connection
That's right.
and being open and receptive. That's an act of love.
That's right.
And I think, like you say on your website, that it's all about love. I know I might
Yeah.
be saying something slightly different, but you said this work that you're doing,
It's
like
like the
love,
medicine. It's kind of the
it's the
medicine
medicine.
that's here to heal us that we've kind of turned away from. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this lovely conversation. And I look forward to connecting with you more, chatting with you more offline. And yeah, thank you. This has been a blessing.
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation, Broderick.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.